you know, counter-espionage, not necessarily interested too much into this. This is more fanciful. It happens, of course. But the truth is, this is Hollywood. Hollywood takes this and runs crazy with counter-espionage, so I think we all understand what this is about. But it involves identifying specific adversaries and developing detailed knowledge about their operations. Direct quote, "The role of the mole is an application of counter-espionage tactics." I mean, they had a series called The Mole. So I think all of us understand what counter-espionage is. The only aspect that I could say contemporarily might be relevant, in my reading on the material, I recognized that I hadn't seen this in terms of espionage. But there is a sense in which virtual identities function with more meaning now than they ever have. Obviously, because we are just becoming virtual. Our identities are just becoming virtual. We've been on the net since the mid-90s, but the idea is, to my knowledge, the idea is, and I'm talking about publicly, the idea is our identities are definitely becoming virtual, right? There's Jason J. Campbell, the person out, this right now, what you're seeing of me is virtual. Even though I am biological here, right? The idea is, and I am, the idea, or maybe I'm not. I shouldn't play like that. But the idea is, in terms of espionage, it's interesting to conceptualize what espionage, counter-espionage, might look like virtually. I'm not going to say any more than that. I'm just going to leave it out there because I don't want to draw any depth to it. I just want to sort of put it out there and let that run for a little bit. What might it look like? What might it look like? Also recognizing that nothing I do in this lecture series is sort of ad hoc. This is all sort of strategically, meticulously planned. But, with that being said, what might virtual espionage look like? You know, what does that mean? What could it mean? Again, I'm not going to answer that question here. It's not the proper forum for me to answer the question. If you want to let that run wild in your mind, let it run wild, and you know, whatever comes of that is what comes of that. Okay, top of page 8, last bit before we close out section 1.1. This idea of counter-espionage, quote, top of page 8, involves knowing all about foreign intelligence services, their people, their installations, their method, their operations. In terms of security, this entails putting into place defense against all hostile and covert operations. So the idea, whether we're talking about counterintelligence, which specifically is, and technically is, sort of meta-level intelligence, it is not trying to get information about our enemies or trying to gain information about threats. People think that counterintelligence has to do with intelligence gathering outside of the domestic jurisdiction, outside of the state borders. That's absolutely false. Right? Counterintelligence is not about garnering information, gaining information about adversaries. That's intelligence. Counterintelligence is about the use of intelligence to gain information about other intelligence systems, other intelligence operations. Now, that does manifest in targeting individuals, in sabotage, in assassinations, in economic, what was the word? I forget this. Start with a D. It was in compromise. Economic disruption, and so on. But the idea is, specifically in terms of counterintelligence, the intelligence is one directed against intelligence communities, against the information that we know or we suspect is motivating other intelligence communities. And that requires planning, the first phase of the intelligence cycle. Planning, I'm not in the intelligence community, but I would imagine counterintelligence is heavily based in the first step, in the first phase in the cycle. You really have to know. The more you know, the better. The less you know is the more inferential logic you'll need, and that can be tricky because obviously whatever logic is there, they know you know is there, and thus it could potentially be disruptive, right? So if you incorporate that false information into the intelligence cycle in your planning phase, it undermines every other phase of the intelligence cycle, right? When you go out to collect the data, you're going to be collecting data on misinformation. When you compartmentalize When you process that data, you're processing misinformation. When you analyze that data, your analysts are, quote unquote, infected with misinformation. All of it. And it will lead to political misinformation, which is one aspect of propagandization that I never use because it's too academic. I don't necessarily see this functioning per se unless we're talking about much, much weaker states. But when you're talking about states of equal power, I wouldn't say it's impossible. It would be an intelligence feat for the annals to be able to misinform to the point at which that misinformation manifested itself in policy and law. I mean, that's just, it's sabotage on a godlike level, right? It would be miraculous. And again, specifically, and I want to stop here and move on to the next section. But the idea is, in terms of counterintelligence, the pinnacle, really, of counterintelligence isn't just the prevention of anything. It really, since we recognize that the inherency of this cycle throughout intelligence communities the world over is a relationship between the community and policymakers of whatever ilk. If the counterintelligence infuses itself, the misinformation infuses itself within the targeted intelligence community and transforms the way in which they plan, transforms the way in which they collect, transforms the way in which they process, transforms the way in which they analyze, transforms what they give to policymakers. Policymakers take that and transform the structure of their government. That is, there really isn't anything more destructive than that. And that's as destructive as it gets. I mean, economic disruption is significant as well. I mean, there's no joke about that. But in terms of just sheer intellect crippling a system, it doesn't get more powerful than that. And then counter-espionage, as I said, I'm not going to go into the counter-espionage because we all know what that looks like, right? It's all of that. It's all of the expected sort of mole, femme fatale, seduction, false freaking relations and such, right? That's the idea. So that concludes this half of section. It took me almost an hour to go through a half page, but I knew that content information would be significant, and I knew in the last section I wouldn't be able to finish it, so I wanted to make sure I didn't rush through it, that I gave it the proper time that it needed. I will continue this lecture series in the next installment, which will be section 2, and a whole new different section of the book. With that, I want to thank you for, I keep on forgetting this. Well, how does it go? With that, I want to thank you for, yeah, I forget how it goes. But anyway, I'm Dr. Jason J. I used to have like a spiel. It was pretty good. It was like initiate spiel now, and then it was like initiate spiel. But I haven't done videos in a while, so I forget how I initiated spiel in my head. Anyway, with that, I'm Dr. Jason J. Campbell. I want to thank you for taking the time to watch my videos. Have a good day.